So I would like to first start out and thank Dr. Mayo so much for being here with us today. I know I speak for everybody when I say we're so excited to have this conversation with you. So this past year, you have become the director of the Writing Center at PNW and have since helped put together many workshops to help attendees develop professionally in many ways. This is a very broad concept that pertains to all majors and fields. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most important aspects of professional development?
Sure. So thanks to Kayla and to Tara for organizing the questions, and to Rachel for organizing the talk, and for everybody who's here. I appreciate it. I'm happy to speak with you. Yes, I've been directing the Writing Center at PNW this year, and the Writing Center is a wonderful place for those of you who are not familiar with it. It's a great place for students, both writers and tutors, to learn and connect and collaborate. It's also a great part-time job for students on campus, for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. So I work collaboratively with two fabulous assistant directors, Heather Augustine and Stephanie Triller-Fryer, and each of them coordinate a separate campus location. So we do, when we're meeting in person, we have a campus location in Hammond and a campus location in Westville as well. In terms of sort of the professional development opportunities, we've been offering hour-long virtual workshops this whole year via Zoom, about one a month, and we've done them on undergraduate grant writing, which Kayla helped with as well, helped facilitate, graduate school personal statements. With academic writing, we've been talking about how to find and understand research articles, interviewing techniques, and strategies for revising writing, and we will have more workshops this semester. We've also been recording all the old workshops we've had, so if any of those topics sound interesting to you, and if you weren't able to attend one of those workshops, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to share the materials with you.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really good. All those people sound very good. So if you don't mind, can you talk a little bit more about some of the other workshops we have?
Sure. So we are repeating a couple of the workshops this semester. So the interviewing workshop we're going to hold tomorrow, Friday, March 12th at 12:30. And again, you can reach out to me if you want to come to that. We're also doing a revision workshop on Friday, April 9th. And you can look for emails and announcements from those. They always go out about a week in advance. And you need to register with us in order for us to send out the Zoom link for it. But we're also planning to involve some kind of like fun writing workshops too. So comedy and joke writing and found poetry, those things will be coming up after spring break at some point, but we don't have a date on those yet. So keep an eye out. And again, my email is just mayo6@pnw, or you can also email me at the Writing Center. So it's just Writing Center at PNW. And I can send you more info about those as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about those. I can speak personally about how beneficial they are for students. I was able to attend the grad school workshop, and it's been really, really helpful as I'm writing personal statements and sending in those applications right now.
Yeah.
So overall, you've got a really strong background in the field of English. One of your publications includes an article titled All Schooled Up, One Teacher's Path Towards Deschooling, which was included in a book called Unsettling Education. Would you mind telling us a bit more about that article?
Sure. Yeah, so my undergraduate degree was in English education from Eastern Michigan University, and I had a history minor there. And then I completed a master's degree in education, but then went back to English for my PhD. And so I do have a background in English, mostly focused on writing, more so than literature. And the book chapter, but also obviously a background in education too. So the book chapter that you mentioned was part of my dissertation, which I completed last year, almost 1 year ago. And 1 year ago this month. And it was a collection, a couple of my friends and colleagues had put together around unsettling education. So both situations that have been unsettling within education, but also ways in which we might unsettle the kind of common sense notions of education for ourselves and for our students and other teachers. And so my chapter kind of talks about my own life story and experiences in the classroom. So I talk about my experiences kind of looking back as a student, and then as a middle school teacher for 10 years, and then recently as a teacher educator. And I talk about, just sort of my experiences, honestly, a lot of frustration I had as a student, as a young person in school, as somebody who really loved learning, but really hated school at the same time, and why that sort of disconnect happened. And then also somebody who, with that experience, then becoming a teacher, and the ways in which I kind of navigated school as an instructor, right? After teaching for a long time, and also increasingly becoming frustrated with the constraints of kind of formal education systems, that kind of led me to want to pursue the PhD in English, and focus a bit on English education and the teaching of English. And think about ways we could kind of study that, research that, think more about it. And it was in that program, in my PhD program, really, as I read about in the article, that I spent some time in the Writing Center, really for the first time as an adult around 10 years ago. And spending time in the Writing Center sort of was an epiphany for me, because I was looking at a place that got rid of a lot of the things that I found to be problems within education. It was a place where there were no grades, there were no teachers, there were no lectures, there was no attendance requirements. People just kind of came and went, and they learned together. And it was obviously messy and complicated, but people were connecting with each other when they needed to, in ways that was collaborative and sort of a peer-to-peer learning process, rather than the kind of top-down educational structures that we're more used to. And so that's really kind of what I ended up studying for my dissertation, was that as kind of a phenomenon. Like, how does that work? And especially, what do peer tutors like yourself, Kayla, get out of those experiences? And so, and I noticed that the things I was noticing in the Writing Center were a lot of the things that I was reading about in this book by Ivan Illich, called Deschooling Society. And it came out in 1971, and Illich was really writing about a lot of the constraints of formal schooling, and kind of what he calls like the ritual of school, this sort of belief that we have that if you go to school for a certain amount of time and you kind of go through the motions of it, that you come out on the other end as somebody who is kind of worthy in society of all of these special treats, right? We sort of, we're not surprised when somebody who has a college degree gets paid more and gets special treatment in society versus somebody who doesn't. And so Illich was really critical about that, and especially from a perspective of poverty and a perspective of the underdeveloped world, that the sort of meritocracy that comes from educational systems really wasn't a fair shake at all for many people. And so the sort of takeaways that I talk about in the article are that that writing centers can offer us some of the same lessons that Illich talked about, but also it gives us a model for how we might think more carefully about education, how we can think about making learning more available to people outside of schools, how we can make the focus on learning versus on teaching, and how we can make schools kind of freer and less confined for learners. And so that's sort of what my takeaway was from both the Writing Center and my reading of Deschooling.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's great. I like how you say you tie your experiences in with the text in the book. That's really good. So, from my understanding, you also study educational theory. So, if you don't mind, would you elaborate a little bit more on what that means? And in your opinion, what are some of the biggest challenges to education that need to be made in America?
Sure. So in terms of, I think like educational theory really looks at challenges. So I think the two things are really connected. Education theory refers to the study of the purposes of education, and also the interpretation of what education is, not just what we say we do, but also the experience of it for people and the implications of it for the economy or for society. So rather than just focusing on educational practice, which is like, here are the things you should do in order to be a teacher, or here's what good teachers do, education theory looks at like why we do education, the historical changes, its relationship to these wider systems. And those were really interesting to me, and sort of partly what led me to want to be an academic and a scholar. So understanding education theory kind of helps, I think, to step outside of the daily practices of education and get kind of a wider view on these social systems that we have. And so education theory is something that I think if more people thought about, I think we would probably be smarter about what we do with education. And it's not just about having the right curriculum or the right syllabus or the right kind of school configuration, but that it's about the fact that schools are embedded within a society and a social system and a culture, and that schools obviously affect that culture, but that culture really affects and shapes the things that happen in schools on a daily basis too. So schools are also really recent in human history, right? As we know them, they've only been around for a couple 100 years. We tend to think of them as this absolute thing, and I think the pandemic has shown us that that we are really reliant on schools, personally, socially, politically, economically, and so I think, but it's also very recent. Most human beings throughout history have not attended schools or not done it in the way that we think of it today. And so in terms of what changes we can think about, I think, again, if you think about it from an educational practice standpoint, people would say that we need to improve teacher training, or bringing more diverse teachers into the classroom, or more diverse texts into the classroom. And I think those things are all important. Reducing standardized testing or making them more engaging for students and projects and their communities, like all of that stuff, I think is incredibly important. But also, if you think about education through a educational theory lens, I think you also start to see the ways in which there are different problems maybe to be solved. That the problems that you see in schools are really symptoms of wider social problems that need to be addressed. Things like inequality, right? That we know that higher achieving students come from wealthier families, and that if we can address poverty, that we are going to help address the educational problems that poverty develops, right? For example, hungry kids, homeless kids, kids who don't have internet or a quiet place to study right now, they just can't be expected to learn as much as someone who comes from wealth and privilege and has, a warm, safe, comfortable, stable home. And so I think a lot of the things that we can do to address education don't actually have anything to do with education. They have to do with things like a minimum wage, affordable housing, healthcare, citizenship for undocumented individuals. Like all of these kind of wider social inequalities will improve educational outcomes, but those seem to be split off in our discourse. A lot of times we talk about how do we fix schools when we're really talking about how do we fix society. And so I think what we can do with educational theory, it helps us to kind of maybe connect those dots a little bit better, and also helps us to connect with other people so that teachers and parents and students and communities can all come together around certain problems, because we know that if we do this thing together politically or socially, it'll actually have benefits for humans and individuals and communities, but also then in schools as well.
Absolutely. So in addition to your work with the Writing Center and educational theory, how did your background prepare you to work in environmental humanities? Can you explain a little bit about what that means and what projects and initiatives that encompasses for you?
Sure. So it's kind of funny you asked that, because I feel like my personal background prepared me more for environmental humanities than any academic background, really. So I grew up in central Michigan, near the Saginaw Bay, which is part of Lake Huron, the other big lake on the other side of Michigan. And among other things, I grew up loving being near the lakes and exploring the forests, and like loving animals and nature and things like that. My grandparents used to own a large tract of land in northern Michigan. It was about 180 acres, mostly wooded, and there was a small cabin, sort of a trailer that was there since the 1950s that we would go stay in, and that's where my family would go for trips. That was sort of our favorite vacation spot. And so I sort of grew up and kind of, I think, fell in love with nature in that particular place. And so that always inclined me to environmental issues in some way. And also I grew up with pets. I grew up with dogs. Many of you have dogs and cats around, and I think in some ways having an animal as close as we do these days as pets really gets you to think more deeply about our relationship to non-human animals in the world. And so those are just a couple of examples. I also, when I learned about industrial agriculture as a high school student, led me to become a vegetarian. And although my food culture in sort of central Michigan was not exactly great for being a vegetarian, it led me to think more about food and about different cultures and ways in which healthy food can be eaten outside of meat. And so I explored kind of cooking and cuisines from all over the world, and eventually learn more about sustainable agriculture and ways in which, ethical treatment of animals can happen in a holistic economy, and farming. And so, I'm no longer a vegetarian, but I still try to eat through more locally sourced and sustainable ways. And now I live just a couple of blocks from Lake Michigan, on the south side of Chicago. And it's just, every time I walk over there, it's just reminds me of the awe-inspiring power of these bodies of water. And so these are just like a few examples of the ways that I got into environmental studies in general, are just through kind of personal, human being experiences, not through a science class or any kind of formal training or learning. And that's probably how a lot of folks first get interested in the environment, is just through life, through the soles of our feet. And I also had an excellent professor as a master's student, named Scott Morrison, who he did a lot of work in environmental education, and also how environmental studies is often kind of relegated to science classes only, but how this is really an important issue for social studies teachers and for English teachers and for math teachers and people, all across the school, and particularly how it relates to social justice too. And so he was really influential for me in getting involved in the environmental humanities. And so the question is like, what is the environmental humanities? And it's obviously an interdisciplinary field, and it's relatively new. This really wasn't very commonly studied or talked about prior to the year 2000 in a lot of ways. And so what it entails is you use the tools of the humanities, right? So you think about the arts, politics, culture, ethics, history, stories, writing, language, learning, religion, like any of the things that we do in the humanities. But you look at issues related to the environment or to place or nature or ecology, the biosphere, any of that non-human nature questions as well. And so oftentimes what the environmental humanities presents is sort of in Western thinking is a contradiction, right? Because we often try to make this split between nature and culture, or we make a split between humans and animals, or a split between science and the humanities, and the environmental humanities obviously tries to work against that. And so in terms of like the practical questions, we might in the environmental humanities think about sustainability, but from a cultural perspective. So obviously there are engineers working on sustainable energy issues, and farming and technologies, but we can also think about it from a linguistic point of view, right? Like what are the words we use in our culture or in our politics when we talk about energy, or when we talk about cows, are we thinking about them as meat? When we're looking at trees, are we thinking about them as resources? When we're looking at streams, are we talking about them as sewers? These are just some ways that we kind of commoditize and otherize particular creatures or other systems. And rather than thinking about them as, like, say, spiritual beings or interrelated, sort of webs of relationships, things that must be cherished versus things that can be consumed. And we can look at how nature is represented in novels or films or poetry. We can look at how like ecofeminists would look at how like women and nature are often connected and otherized within particular texts. How people of color and nature are represented. So those are just some things that like the environmental humanities is interested in. For my work, I look at climate change in education. In particular, there's not been enough climate change in education, and again, when it is brought in, it's often brought in as a debatable topic, and it's sort of we look at both sides of it as if there's a legitimate doubt in any way that the climate is changing and has changed, so instead of focusing on this so-called debate that was really pushed in because of the oil industry's backing, we can also look at how climate change can cause us to think differently with our students about the future, right? Like, what do we imagine the future to be? How many of us imagine a future that is better or worse than what we currently have, and how does climate change play into that? And also, how can we read, in an English perspective, how can we read and write through this huge lens of climate change, right? It's like the scope of it is too big to really comprehend in language. And the scale of it is too big for a novel or for an hour-and-a-half film. So like, how do you represent these huge, slow-moving disasters or complicated systems that don't work as well in some of our politics or our art systems either. So I also look at environmental rhetoric. So interested in things like how nonfiction writing and documentary films engage with identification and communication around the environment. How discourses of rights and politics come into play around things like nature and land. So I've also been looking more at freshwater and the Great Lakes in particular. I think those of us living in the Midwest and in the Great Lakes region, this is probably the most important thing for us to think about in terms of our collective rights to water, our protection of the lakes and the watershed. And it's going to become more and more important as fewer and fewer people have access to clean and fresh water. And we have these huge, unique bodies of water that we need to not take for granted at all in the future.
Good. Wow. You really make a lot of good points here. I especially love how you highlight the integration of various humanities subjects with the environment. That's really good. So from what we talked about so far involving the work, I know you have an English background, and of course, English is a very versatile subject. So do you have any advice for writers and other students pursuing the English degree?
Definitely. I can tell you from my advice is kind of from my experience, I would say, and then I'll get to the versatility after that. But I would say from my own experience, don't be afraid to change majors. It's more common than you'd think. Most people who end up with a degree have changed their major or added minors or something along the way. And also just be really familiar with the fact that there are a lot of career options out there. My backstory, I came from a family with a lot of teachers and a lot of small business owners. And so when I started to think about college very seriously, in high school, those were the options that came to mind. So I started off as a business major and absolutely hated it and didn't know if I didn't like college or if I didn't like business or what the deal was. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But after some conversations, I ended up going into education. But really in my brain, those were like the two fields where I knew adults who had these jobs and I knew what those jobs looked like. But of course, I could have done lots of other things that I might have been very happy with, but my own brain was sort of focused on doing something that I actually knew existed in the world. And so, I was very happy to switch majors into the humanities and to become a teacher, and didn't know whether I'd like it, but I really did love it and still do love teaching now at the college level. But I think, I also wanted a path that would get me a job after the undergraduate degree. And I know that's true of a lot of PNW students as well. But there are just so many jobs out there, and jobs that I didn't know about because I didn't know people who lived in those fields and worked in those jobs. So in terms of versatility, I mean, I think, coming from an English background, certainly like language and literacy, writing and communication are sort of the basis of everything we do in any field, in any career. So I think a background in English would help you succeed and excel in anything you do. Obviously, there aren't a lot of jobs that are called English, right? Unlike like nursing or teaching, like those are undergraduate degrees that directly lead you in a professional path. English can be a little bit more trickier, or history or sociology, right? Can feel a little bit trickier in that way. But at the same time, there are plenty of jobs that require backgrounds in these particular fields. But in terms of English, obviously, the first thing I would say is that we don't just study fiction and novels, and that's one thing that we do, but it's certainly not all of it. But that's how English is taught oftentimes in high school, and so people kind of imagine that is only what we do in English. And also, I think people still, for some reason, look down on English majors because they don't see it as a path toward a job after college. But again, there are so many things: reading, writing, thinking, critical thinking. There are few degrees that prepare you as well as an English degree does for those sort of things. And I think also, like, I'm friends with a lot of people who have an undergraduate degree in English who have done all sorts of things. They've become journalists, teachers, librarians. They work in politics, law, business, broadcasting. They work in film and museums and television. And there's just so many careers that they've gone into that an undergraduate degree in English helped them to achieve. So I guess one place to think about this is like, think about work that you find important and problems that you want to address in the world, and then how you kind of picture yourself in those particular fields, and think about the ways in which writing can help you to work in that particular domain, or careful reading, right? Critical reading. So even if being an English major isn't for you, it's not for everybody. We have a 15 credit minor that is pretty much open to students taking whatever classes they want to study at the 200 level or above. We have a creative writing minor for people who are interested in going in that direction. We've got the writing for interactive media certificate. So, regardless of what major you are, and in fact, I think in some ways, being an engineering major with an English minor, or a biology major with an English minor, having that extra background will help you. Every company needs help with communication, with email, social media, press releases, internal reports, research, all of that. And so I think English can help you do that. It's incredibly versatile. But again, it's part of it is just realizing that it's not just studying novels, although that's one of the things that we love to do. But there are lots of other courses that hopefully we'll talk about in a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As a senior English writing major getting ready to graduate, I've really seen the versatility of that degree kind of firsthand, and connections within the various projects that I've been able to do. In respect to the different endeavors that you've shared with us so far, have you seen many connections among them? Do you feel that working in English helps in any way with your environmental justice work, or that environmental justice work has helped your path with educational theory?
Definitely. Yeah. It seems like they're all kind of all over the place, right? But I do kind of think of myself as working within three particular areas: composition and rhetoric, which is a part of English studies, and education, and then in pedagogy and curriculum and all of that, but also in environmental humanities. And so, I think the way that I see them working together. Part of it was that I studied different things at different times, and I took breaks between my degrees a little bit too. So I was a classroom teacher for 10 years, and that really helped me to learn a lot and to kind of put a lot of these pieces together. But in the way that they relate, again, the place I would start probably is language. So looking closely at how the sort of human and more than human world is represented in language and discourse and our metaphors. And I think that's a really important place to start. Again, biologically speaking, we might consider a great example from like eco-justice scholars is that the differences in our brains between a drain and a stream. Biologists might test the water and say it's the exact same thing, but if we call it a drain versus we call it a stream, those are going to be very different, right? In both in our concepts, but also in the way we interact with them. And that's just an example. And bringing that kind of lesson to an educational setting kind of is one way to connect all three of the fields that I work in. Another thing, again, getting back to like, I think the way that all three of these connect for me is that that nature culture split, right? So thinking really carefully about what that means and how that's not actually true, and how the idea of nature is very much a human representation. There is no nature out there. It's sort of what we imagine, what we construct socially, and what we call nature. And a lot of that comes from a very like human-centric outlook, versus thinking of ourselves as an intricate part of nature, although a very powerful part of nature, right? So another place that my kind of thinking and research goes is to a concept called the Anthropocene, which is expressed sometimes as thinking about the end of nature in some ways, that human beings have become so powerful that we become a geological force on this earth over the last 50 years or 200 years, however you want to name it, that we've remade the landscape in such a way that the earth is no longer quote unquote natural, or unshaped in some way. And so the oceans are different because of our work as human beings, and the air is different. Our cells are different in some ways, and invasive species and deforestation and all kinds of other things, the carbon-based economy leading to global warming, right? All these things get us to think about how yes, there is no nature and culture split, and at the same time, human beings and human culture is really implicated all over the globe, in ways that it's really hard to back off of, right? You can't just sort of step back and not address things like invasive species, but so that causes us to become even more engaged in the landscape and the world around us. So we're trying to solve problems that we've created to a certain extent as human beings, and it's a really complicated time, and it's really important, I think, from an English perspective and a writing perspective, to think about those decisions and think about what do we make of this? How do we make sense of it? And what are the most sensible and ethical ways to move forward in a time that's so fraught?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So you've been heavily involved with revising the English writing major. So can you tell us a little bit more about the new courses that are involved with the new area of public writing and rhetoric?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing this up. I'm really excited about the new courses in public writing and rhetoric that we have in the English department. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and we've had three different concentrations within the English degree at PNW for a long time. So we've had literature, we've had English teaching or English education, and then we've also had the writing concentration. The literature and English teaching programs were updated, I believe, last year. And it was time for the writing major to be updated. And so I worked with some of my colleagues in the English department, and we were able to really add in. So now the writing major kind of consists of two different focus points. The first one being the interactive media writing, which Professor Mabrito has taught for a very long time. And so there's 15 credits in that. But we're going to be having sort of 18 credits in this new public writing and rhetoric field. So we're bringing in a lot of new courses. Various professors are going to rotate teaching these. So Professor Karen Bishop Morris and myself will be teaching them, amongst other people. And these courses will be offered next year, starting in the fall. And, really it gives us an opportunity, students learn about rhetoric as kind of some key concepts in first year writing classes. But it's not really focused on in a lot of other courses right now. And so, and yet the tools of rhetoric are incredibly powerful and really engaging for students, right? We sort of live in rhetoric all the time. We just don't necessarily know it and talk about it and identify it. And so students in these courses are going to study how discourse intersects with public life, and how it works in how discourse operates within particular groups, and how it interacts with culture, identity, identification, politics, and social change. So a lot of the courses are going to focus on, what are we going to do with the world as we see it and as we found it, and also, questions of the environment, like I brought up too. So we're going to look at how language and writing operate within the real world, not just an imaginary, classroom setting. So a few of the courses that we will be having next year. English 202 is called an Engaging English, which is a course that I'm going to be teaching in the fall. We're going to focus on rhetoric, and particularly as documentary film as like basically a rhetorical kind of genre of public writing, and how it kind of makes a difference in the world today through documentary. So that's what we're going to study and watch in the fall. There's also a course writing with data, or writing for the public good, that Professor Morris is going to be teaching 428, English 428. So a special topics course on that. She'll also be teaching a course on grants and nonprofit writing, so a whole course on that in particular. In the spring next year, I'll be teaching a course on environmental ethics, policy, and sustainability. So we'll be looking at, again, environmental humanities questions and environmental justice, and we'll be looking at, again, focused on the kind of Great Lakes region, but actually creating writing and scholarship and multimodal kind of video essays and things that address the problems and questions of Indiana and Northwest Indiana and the Great Lakes region too, and actually for a wider audience, not just writing for your teachers, but writing for the world and for communities, to do something about these problems, and also some other advanced topics, rhetorical studies courses. So I look forward to teaching classes on like forests and tourism and climate change, and just various topics courses that will read a lot in those particular fields. But as you can see, like the courses kind of bridge writing and rhetoric and various STEM fields. But again, unlike the kind of STEM classes, which are really important and really great, we're just going to be looking at how language and writing make a difference in the world, and how they operate within those particular fields, and within the wider public, and hopefully preparing students to be better writers, thinkers, communicators, and also deeply engaged in these public conversations and these social problems that we're going to be bringing up. So hopefully it'll appeal to people in English and in chess, but also people who are studying in the STEM fields as well, who might want to see how we approach these questions and how they can learn more about them through a public and social humanities kind of lens.
This is really, really interesting to hear about. As a student here, I've been able to kind of engage with the creative writing courses and the interactive media certificate, but a lot of my work has taken me into grant writing and rhetoric. So to hear that these courses are expanding on those topics is really exciting. So we are at that really exciting point of the semester where a lot of PNW students are preparing to graduate. Can you offer some advice as they prepare to navigate the job market?
Sure. Well, first, congratulations to everybody who was preparing to graduate. And like I said, I graduated last year, and it's such an exciting thing. But it's also a really challenging time to be graduating, right? I didn't get to actually walk and receive my diploma, a year ago because of that. So, it's clear the pandemic has really upended the world over the past year, right? We're coming on the kind of 1-year anniversary of all of that. So it gives us a chance to step back and think about it. And I think this is, going back to environmental humanities, this is an example of, how this microscopic virus, right, and a mutation can completely change our economy and our politics and our society and everything just in a series of weeks, right? So, but in terms of advice for the job market, I mean, I think it's really challenging right now. But obviously, I think we can see a good deal of hope on the horizon for vaccine production and distribution, and federal stimulus legislation recently passed. I think all of these are a good sign for anybody who's looking for a job right now. I think that things will be are looking far better right now than they even did a few months ago. But I do think things will be tough depending on the field you want to work in or the work you want to do, and maybe where you want to live as well. There are some areas that were more hard hit by this, or areas that certain fields that have been really decimated, right? This wouldn't be a great time to get a job in the airline industry, for example, or in tourism. At the same time, there are some fields that are incredibly, growing exponentially, and I think will continue to as well. So, I think my advice is a couple of fold. Like the first one, which doesn't really seem like job advice at all, but so a lot of people think we live in the age of the individual, that everything is about me and my life and my sort of like individual autonomous self. And social media kind of reinforces this, and reality TV does. And a lot of the stories we tell are about sort of this, this heroic individual. Superhero narratives are sort of an example of that. And I think that everybody's in competition with each other and all of that. But I think it also has created a lot of huge social problems, this sort of individualistic thinking. It's created, suicide, drug addiction, depression, anxiety. A lot of the problems we face right now are a result in some ways of individualistic thinking. So and the pandemic has shown us we are social creatures. We need each other. We cooperate. We work together. We connect with each other, and that's what brings us happiness and structure and a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And so I think one way to overcome that kind of loneliness and the problems of the sort of individual age is to think about working for the public good. So my advice for people looking for jobs is like, try to find a job in which you work with other people and that you're dedicating yourself to something, making a difference in the world, making a productive change, and working for some kind of solving a big problem, but doing it in local ways, and try to serve your community in some way, whatever that means to you. And it could be the larger human community, or it could be your neighborhood, or the environment, which is part of our community too, right? So think about what matters most to you, and think about what your degree has prepared you for, like what skills and knowledge you have from your degree and what you care about, and then try to find a way that you can do some good and get paid for it at the same time. It could be finding a job in education. They're in desperate need of teachers in the Northwest Indiana area, and a lot of other places around the country right now. Especially teachers who know how to use the internet like most of you do. So, I think finding a job in education is one way to do it. Even if you don't know you want to be a teacher, it's still like the reason I got into it was I didn't know if I would love it, but I knew that it would be doing a good thing for the community. It's a form of community service, I think. And it also gives you a good paying job that allows you to learn, right? It's a constant learning experience when you're a teacher. It's never a bad thing to have being an educator on your resume, because it means that you were a leader, that you were a communicator, and that you were an organized professional who was able to, get a whole bunch of people in a classroom to move in a certain direction. So I think that's one example. But, obviously working in community food banks, women's shelters, local government, state and federal parks and land management, public health departments, like all of these are doing really important work right now. And there are jobs out there for people who want to work hard and make the world a better place. And so, if you're working in something that you have a passion for and that you feel like is doing a good job, it makes those harder or annoying parts of your job a whole lot easier when you get up every day and you feel good about the thing you're doing. Because all jobs have that kind of annoying bit, or many annoying bits. But if you have a purpose and a determination and you love the people you work with or the land you work with, you're going to be more likely to want to get up and do that thing. Another piece of advice, I guess, is, and this is people, Kayla and I have had conversations about graduate school. And, I know that there are some folks who graduate from undergrad and they kind of, especially in a strange economic time like this, and they sort of look out at the world and they say, I'm just going to keep doing a little bit more school. We'll see how it looks in a couple of years. And the same thing happened, when I was graduating from undergrad in 2003. And, graduate school is hard. It's competitive. It's really focused on a particular thing, but it's also really, really expensive. So my suggestion for anybody who's looking at graduate school is you should try to find ways to not pay for it. There are lots of programs out there that can give you grants. You can be hired as a research assistant or a teaching assistant that will pay for your tuition and sometimes pay you money while you're doing it. but graduate studies is really hard and it's really expensive. It usually costs 2 to 3 times as much as you were paying for undergrad, sometimes more. And so for those of you coming out of undergrad with debts and loans, rather than doubling down and putting more on top of that and hoping that in a couple more years you'll be able to pay them off, I would say, think carefully about what you want to do. Maybe take a couple of years off and try to work in a particular field, right? So, if, for example, if you want to, if you think you want to go to law school, for example, right? If you think you want to be a lawyer, rather than jumping from undergrad right to law school, take a couple of years and try to work as a paralegal or try to work in an immigration law support organization. Try to find something, even teach high school government or something. Find something for a few years so you can pay off your student loans, so you can kind of get even with that, but also so you can meet lawyers and talk to them about their jobs and kind of like get involved in the field to learn more about it, rather than just like jumping into it, because you want to make sure that the graduate studies that you're going to do are going to set you up for a career after that, rather than coming out like I did working at Starbucks with people who were really qualified in the classics, say had a master's degree in it, but they were working for minimum wage and there's just no way to pay off those debts in that way. So trying to learn more about it, and thinking about like how you can kind of mold yourself in a particular way, right? So I studied English, but then I had an education degree, which helped me as a teacher to further my career and also gave me a pay bump at the time. But you can also think about combining degrees, right? Like if you have a major in biology, but you're really interested in writing, you could get a graduate degree in journalism and become a science writer. Most people don't combine those two things together. I have a friend who had an undergraduate degree in aviation, and she wasn't really looking to become a professional pilot. She ended up going to law school, and now she works in like aviation law, right? So she's like one of the most qualified people who can do this very specific thing just because she combined these two degrees that most people don't have together. And so, think about new areas of study that could kind of maybe set you up for something that you want to do, but also set you apart from other people if graduate school is something you're considering. But certainly a lot of people, are looking for careers right now. But that again is a challenge, but I think there are things out there, especially if you're willing to move. Unfortunately, that's sort of the reality of our economy right now. I moved from Michigan to North Carolina in order to find a teaching job rather easily. And then I had to move again from North Carolina to Chicago in order to do my PhD, because that was the program that accepted me. I'm not unhappy about those moves, but I had to be prepared to move in order to sort of go in the career paths that I really wanted to.
Great piece of advice here. Thank you very much for that. I'm one of those people that will be graduating at the end of the spring, so I'll definitely be taking all that with me. But it has been a challenge. So, speaking of challenges, what are some of the biggest challenges you have faced as a professional, and how have you overcome them?
Sure. So, I've been really fortunate in my career. I've been very, very lucky. I haven't faced, long periods of unemployment, or, I've never been fired or laid off or anything like that. And so I've been very, very fortunate. And most of the challenges I faced really were kind of shifting into these new areas, right? So moving from Michigan to North Carolina was a challenge for me. Moving from teaching English at one level to teaching history at another, and then back to English with a different group of students. Moving from teaching middle school to teaching college was a shift, right? Moving from being a teacher to teaching teachers. So all these like shifts that I've made in my career are all really sort of more like moving into the unknown, but most of them were things that I had chosen for myself and that I really was looking forward to, which of course made them easier to do. They weren't forced on me. But I think being really flexible and open, not being afraid to work outside of your comfort zone, being confident, but not afraid to fail at the same time. Because the people who are hiring you, if you're in a good work environment, will never let you fail, and will be there to support you. And just kind of putting yourself fully into the work, and knowing that hard work will be rewarded within your field. I think that really the best thing for me, the thing that's helped me overcome any challenges, is just making sure that I'm not trying to go it alone, not trying to be the only person doing it, seeking out knowledgeable peers, finding mentors who can help you, not waiting for a mentor to find you and sort of pick you up and take you with them, but really seeking that out, and bothering people if need be in order to find a mentor. So I mentioned my former professor Scott earlier on, and he's really been essential for helping me on this journey. He was a middle school teacher who eventually became a professor, and is currently doing that work. And he was just a few years ahead of me in that sort of path. And so I've been able to connect with him knowing that he was a few steps ahead of where I wanted to be. And he was able to help me to kind of fill in between. But yeah, meeting people, reaching out, making friends, asking questions. And I think the more connected you are with other people, you might lose your job one day, but you'll have a network of people, and a strong network who can help you find the next job, or even help you to find a better job as you move forward. So again, my advice is don't try to be the individual, but be a social creature, because we are social creatures, and find a network of support people wherever you go, who can help you to succeed.
That is really, really important advice. And on behalf of everybody, I would like to thank you so much for your time and sharing all of this with us. I know that we covered a wide range of really interesting topics today. And so if you wouldn't mind, if you have a few minutes to answer some questions from our guests, if anybody has anything they'd like to add or comment or ask.
Of course. Thank you.
So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat, or you can just raise your hand. We're a small group, so I think we can see you, or just unmute yourself and just ask. We have a comment from Emily Hickson. So it just says, thank you for the great information and perspective. Enjoyed learning more about your background and experiences.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to put that in there because I have to run, but thank you. It was really,
Thanks,
really
Emily.
interesting to hear more.
But if we have any questions, we'd love from any students or anyone else. Any questions? So I just want to point out a couple things. So this was organized by our student advisory board. So I think they did a really great job of putting this all together. So thanks to Kayla and Tara for putting these questions together. And so thank you to them. And so one last call, any questions?
Hello.
Okay.
Hello, Rachel. I'm a tutor at the Writing Center. Sorry.
Oh, okay. It's Kinsey.
I'm at my work right now with Trio. So I just want to say this was a lovely discussion when I did come in to really hear about, Dr. Mayo and his passion for teaching and how it came about. I think that was really great. What advice do you have for students that are going into graduate school or considering graduate school to teach English in that sense? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. There are a couple of different paths that people take into education, right? So I did my undergraduate major in English education. So part of my program was taking education courses and getting state certification, student teaching in my last semester, and then being prepared to teach right after that. But there are a lot of also more common ways these days, or what we used to call atypical routes to teaching that are actually becoming more and more typical, which is some people start subbing once they have a certain number of credit hours or an undergraduate degree. They haven't studied education at all, but you can get a job very quickly, depending on the field you've worked in. You can get a job as a classroom teacher, even without having a degree in education. At the same time, some people want to have the state certification or need it. Some states are much more diligent about requiring it. And so there are also master's programs that, if you, let's say you studied history as an undergrad, and you majored in it, but then you decide, I want to be a history teacher. There are masters in education, or we have the transition to teach program that the School of Education offers at PNW. There are also like Masters of Arts in Teaching programs. So you're basically doing like just all the education courses in that particular field with student teaching. And then you come out with a master's degree, which again, in some places and in some situations qualifies you as a higher paid employee. And so I think, at the school, University of North Carolina, where I did my master's degree, they actually moved to not doing high school teaching degrees for the undergrad because they realized that the amount of content knowledge you need to teach high school these days, it's too hard to both do English and history, say, or English and biology, biology and education or history and education at the same time, that they wanted their high school teachers to focus on the content area as an undergrad and then come back and do a master's degree to specialize in teaching. And so that's also really common, that people will go back and do the education courses later. But, again, in terms of suggestions, I would say number one would be, as I mentioned before, like just be very, very clear about your reasons for graduate school and like how graduate school is going to set you up on a path to do something, because it is such a specialized field. If you want to be a librarian, then definitely having just a degree in English will not set you up to have like a full career necessarily in library science. You'll want to get that degree in library science, or to be a veterinarian, right? Like there are certain things you have to get a certain graduate level degree to be an architect, to be a lawyer, to be a dentist or something, right? But so knowing that is really important. But in terms of education too, I think in terms of being a teacher, the more varied background you have, right? So I had a background in English and in history. When I was able to finally get a job after subbing for a while, they needed an English teacher for 7th grade. So I was able to hop into that position. But then the next semester, that position was no longer needed. They needed somebody in 8th grade history. And the fact that I had certifications in both of them allowed me to kind of move between them. So having certification in more than one thing, especially in the high need fields, so those would be special education or exceptional education, in math and science are really key, and as well as in ESL or second language learning. Having those backgrounds, being fluent in multiple languages or being able to teach multiple things just makes you really, really appealing to high schools or to middle schools, because they can move you around as they need within the building. You're not just you're more of a multi-tool, right? Instead of just being a screwdriver, you could do lots of different things. But also, I think it allows you to find your passion and to do the kind of interdisciplinary work that I've been talking about too. So you're going to connect with those other teachers from other departments and work together on projects and learn from each other and collaborate. And you're going to be a better teacher of your subject because you're going to know more than just like this one narrow thing that you've been studying.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify too, I am a new tutor to the Writing Center too, guys, so I didn't know if I mentioned that already, but I'm really excited to see where that leads me and where that takes me to. And thank you for sharing all of this about your experiences, Dr. Mayo.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for being a tutor.
That's great. Thanks for your question. And I see you have your chess T-shirt on, so that's
right.
Great. So, okay, thanks for everyone that came to this presentation, and thanks so much to Dr. Mayo for taking his time out to answer these questions.
Of course.
And like I was saying, the Student Advisory Board put this together. Kayla and Tara came up with these questions, and something else that I wanted to point out. So Kayla and Tara mentioned that they're graduating, so we're going to have some more room on our Student Advisory Board. So if anyone's interested in joining, they can hop over to our website and take a look and fill out the application, and maybe next year they can help put together one of these. And if you know anyone that was not able to attend today, we did record this, so we'll put it on our CHES YouTube. So I think there was a lot of really useful information in here. So if you want to pass it along, then you can. So, okay.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.